All right, so we got to talk about how to build an introduction for AP Seminar. So this hopefully will tell you about the different components about AP Sem for the introduction and how you kind of move forward with building your own. So as we look at the four things of an introduction, we think we need a hook, some form of inquiry, how you're asking your question. We need to build your background information, build some context, and then lastly, put the thesis in there. So if we're looking at the hook, you're looking at 1 to 3 sentences. Usually we can open with like an interesting fact, a statement, or a question. All in all, though, what you're looking at, though, is that you are introducing us to your topic of information, and you're also inviting me to want to read more as your reader. So you're trying to draw me into your paper. A good example of this is taken from the AP Seminar stimulus packet that we teachers get. And that is the Cambodian saying, "We don't forget the old rice pot when we get the new one," well describes the situation women are facing in Cambodia. Notice that this is a statement, this is a fact, this is a piece of evidence from the students' research. So what they did is they brought this research in and have invited me to think about what does it mean to think about this Cambodian saying, right? This is an example of a statement, and they are inviting me to start thinking about their topic of Cambodian women, specifically with gender and cultural norms. Another example of this is just a fact or statistic. According to data collected by the Oregon Procurement and Transplantation Network and Transplantation Network, as of January 16, 2020, 84% of the 112,000 patients on the Oregon waiting list need kidneys. This is from national data, right? So what they've done here is they put a startling fact or idea. We already know what the topic is going to start being about. We're going to assume it's going to be about organ procurement or transplants or anything of the like. Then as we move on to part 2 of your introduction, we got to think about how are you going to introduce your inquiry? How are you going to introduce the idea of your research? This is truly built off on by maybe introducing your individual research question. Maybe you're going to explain why your topic is important. Or are you going to explain the need for this topic in your research? Have you noticed that there's something missing in your research and you're like, this really needs to be studied more, or there's more information that needs to be had here? Usually the easiest way out of this, just throw your individual research question. It doesn't have to feel nuanced, just throw it in there. It situates your research, right? An inquiry example here, women in Cambodia face unequal opportunities in the workforce due to gender disparity. I know they're probably going to either be talking cultural, social, or they may be talking about futuristic. I would have to read the rest of the introduction to figure that out. Another example of inquiry here, with transplant demands and rates reaching an all-time high due to advances in medicine, a review of the current kidney allocation system is justified. The student here is saying that we need to re-look at kidney allocation systems. This seems like they might be taking an ethical lens. I would have to dive more into that introduction to figure that out. Speaking of lenses, when you get to part 3, this is when you get to introduce those things. So for example, how are you going to build your rationale, background information, and context, right? As an author, you need to establish your credibility right away, so use sources, including credibility statements, to provide information that is necessary for us to understand your issue. So your rationale can include 2 sources explaining the information or importance of the topic, startling facts, for example. You may provide the audience with necessary information as to what they're about to be reading. You can show explicit statement of your lens, and this paper will be looking at the ethical implications of yada, yada, yada. Or you can include important or pertinent information about the lack of findings and or need for change. So you can kind of continue to build up on your inquiry portion of the second part of your introduction, if you will. So here's an example of this student bringing up rationale, background information here. Their present situation is a tug of war between historical and cultural expectations of the past and increasing social changes aimed at improving the future. The progress of women's roles in the workplace is hindered by the influence of older generations and cultural texts, such as, I don't know how to pronounce it, I apologize, which moralize adherence to Cambodian tradition. Notice the student is situating research here. They brought in this source, they explained a bit of the issue. They look like they're improving towards the future, so it looks like we're using a futuristic lens. They have built all of these components in, so I know as the reader where we're about to go. Another example of this is physicians are performing transplant surgery, prioritize patient care and ethics. with recipients favoring their own health. Hospital officials, however, take a holistic approach and view the issue of transparent allocation within context. So it looks like they're going to be looking at the ethical implications of the transplant prioritization list or prioritization list. How can that change? How can that be improved upon based on ethical and moral implications? You can see that explicitly laid out here. They put their lens in here, and they're telling us what the essay is going to be about. Speaking of telling what the essay is going to be about, that's when we get to your thesis. Your thesis is part 4, or the final component of your introduction. Think of this as your roadmap. This is how you understand the IRR. So a thesis should include the lens of inquiry, an objective, information from subheading or body paragraphs, and a stakeholder involved in understanding the problem. This helps us as readers understand, what am I about to read, what's going to show up in your introduction bodies and conclusion paragraphs, and what can I expect out of that. So an example of this is, however, recent social changes in Cambodia may counter the static culture significantly, creating opportunities for women to receive higher education and take more control over their lives. What I see in this thesis here right now is that in that kind of after the comma, I see that there's going to be 2 body paragraphs, one on receiving higher education and one taking control over lives. I can see that happening there. I can also see that social change is an aspect of this. I am missing the lens here, though. This is not showing a futuristic lens, and I would like to see that in the thesis. So even though this scored really high, that does not mean that it's a perfect thesis. As we continue with the next one here, with transplant demands and rates reaching an all-time high due to advanced medicine, a review of current kidney allocation systems is justified. When inspecting the hospital's view on renal transplant reallocation, some distinct views emerged: renal transplant recipients and physicians favoring a reevaluation of the system, with hospital administrators opposing. I am going to see a few different body paragraphs here. We're going to talk about the renal transplant recipients. I don't know what that means, but I'm about to learn here soon. Physicians favoring a reevaluation of the system. Same thing. I don't necessarily know what that means, but I'm going to be looking at that as well. And it looks like I'm also going to be looking at a counter argument with hospital administrators opposing the change to this system. I can tell that a change is coming. I can tell that they are looking at the ethics of the situation. I can tell that there's a lot of different viewpoints and stakeholders involved. This thesis has every component that I need in order to give it a high score. So if we're to put everything together here, your introduction should have a hook, an introduction, you should introduce your inquiry. You need to build background information, which also means building your context, explaining how your research question came to be, explaining your need for this lens, maybe limitations, implications of your research that you found so far. And lastly, a thesis that situates the entirety of your essay, including your body paragraphs and the subheadings that would appear in those. That is how you formulate an introduction paragraph.